Welcome to our second elections workshop in a series of 4 workshops. So we've got a couple more coming up for the rest of the month that we'll give you some details on towards the end of the session. We had our first candidate workshop session last week, which was quite a broad overview of running a sort of digital campaign. Obviously this year there'll be extra challenges in running an elections campaign. That was quite a long one, but you can find all that on our website still as well. But I'm going to try and make sure this is a little bit shorter for people this week. It's a lot more focused just on the writing of a manifesto. I'm going to ask if people hold questions until the end. It just makes it a little bit easier if we can take all the questions at the end. That way we can keep the recorded video of just this first section, which is on the actual presentation itself. So this will be recorded, so we ask if you just pop any questions you have through the Q&A or in the chat to the panelists, and then I'll take those questions at the end. But yeah, just to be aware that this is being recorded and put on the website, but we won't include the Q&A at the end in the recording. Also a note on questions. This goes for throughout the elections period. I will answer questions. I'll answer general questions. If you've got a question about manifesto writing in general, I'll answer those sorts of questions. What I won't do is answer questions around a really specific point. So if you've got a manifesto point that you want to ask me, oh, do you think this is a good idea? For instance, I'm not going to answer those questions. I'm not going to advise you on whether a certain manifesto point is a good one to have, or whether you should have a certain manifesto point or not. And I won't ever take a look at a draft of a manifesto from someone. I will check all manifestos at the end to make sure they don't break any election rules, but I'm not going to sort of advise people or spell check a manifesto or anything like that for people, because that way it becomes quite difficult for me to make sure I've given the same level of support to each candidate, which is what I'm supposed to do. So I will answer general questions. So you'll hear a lot of general advice on manifesto writing in this session. And if you've got a general question around a manifesto, then I'm happy to answer that, but I won't go into specific with anyone's manifesto for them. So bear that in mind if you're putting questions in the Q&A in the chat. And also, I'm going to answer it in front of other candidates as well. So you also don't want to ask anything too specific here, because then my answer will maybe give candidates an idea of what other candidates are putting in their manifestos. So with that in mind, we're going to go through a few top tips for writing a manifesto. What is a manifesto? So the first question is, what is a manifesto all about? I think this is what I always get asked by candidates. I think people are often a bit freaked out by manifestos and don't really know what to do with them. So the first thing is, the most obvious thing, is what is a manifesto, and it's a statement of who you are and what you stand for. So if I'm a student and I don't know any of the candidates very well at all, I don't know who to vote for. If I'm reading a manifesto, what I want to get a sense of from you as a candidate is, who are you? What do you do? What makes you you? And why are you running? And what are you going to do in that role? The manifesto will appear on the ballot for voters. So when people go to vote during elections week, they will see a picture, your picture and your name, and then they'll be able to click on the manifesto, and it will drop down, and it will show them the text of your manifesto. And that'll be the same for all candidates on the ballot. So it is the one place where you can definitely know that a student has a chance to read something from you. By no means do all students read the manifestos, and we'll go on to that in a little bit. But anything else you put out, whether it's a poster on campus, whether it's something on social media, whether it's what you do during candidate question time, you're not going to reach every voter with that, but by any means. But with the manifesto, that there's at least everyone that goes to vote at least has the opportunity to read that. I suppose it's your core chance to get something across to voters. There is a 500-word limit on manifestos, so you can't go over that, and the text box won't actually let you go over that. But you also don't have to use all of those 500 words. That's just the maximum word limit. These have to be submitted by the 28th of February, so when nominations close, and you have to have a manifesto this year, we're saying if you don't submit a manifesto, we will not let you stand without one. So please absolutely make sure you get that manifesto in by then. I'm just wondering about that 28th of February date. I will double check that and confirm that with candidates. We might have actually said March 5th for manifestos. I'll double check that and clarify that with people, but certainly at the latest it will be March the 5th. But I mean, really, as we'll come on to, manifestos, in my mind, should be probably one of the first things you do for a campaign, because so much else flows from it. So you really want to be getting them in sooner than rather than later anyway, but I will clarify that deadline for you. Why bother with a manifesto, other than the fact that you have to have one as part of the election rules? Why put time and effort into it? The first thing is it makes it clear to voters who you are and what you stand for. It helps focus your mind. So for me, I think one of the first things you should do for a campaign is start writing your manifesto, because it's where you can really sit and think about what are the things that I want to prioritize as a candidate, what are the things that I want to get across to voters, and what do I want my campaign to be about. It's the core message, really. It's your chance to shape your message as a candidate to voters. I think if you start a campaign early on, sitting down and thinking about your manifesto and drafting that could influence everything else. It'll influence what sort of things you want to talk about on your social media. When you're creating an election video, it will help you think about what you want to put across in your election video. It will help you prepare for candidate question time. And it will give you the things you want to say to voters when you're interacting with them during election week as well. I think the manifesto writing should come quite early on when you're planning your campaign, and it's a real chance for you to sit and think about, what is my message in this election campaign? What is it I want to achieve actually if I'm elected as well? And of course, the democratic side of it is that it gives students a chance to hold you to account. So if you put out a manifesto and you're elected off that, then that to some degree students can hold you to account over that if you become an elected officer. There's an important thing there for students to know what it is they're voting for and be able to point to that in future times. Now, obviously, there's always going to be things you're not able to do that were in a manifesto. It might just be that circumstances change by the time you're in office, or you find out about other things that actually change how you might want to go about doing something. It's not that you have to do every single thing exactly as you said you're going to do it in your manifesto, but it does give a general sort of idea of what your approach will be if you're elected, and it's important that you try to fulfil that as much as you can, actually. So really, throughout this session, what I want you to be thinking about in the back of your heads as we go through some tips on manifesto writing is, what is your vision? What makes you as a candidate different to other candidates? What do you want to change? Why are you running? What is it you want to do? What is it you want to achieve by being an officer? Obviously, there's lots of personal reasons why you want to run to be an officer. It looks great on your CV. It gives you lots of new skills and experiences. That's all fantastic. But for voters to choose you, they need to know what they're going to get out of it as well. What are you going to do for them if you're elected as an officer in these elections? What is your vision for the role? So we're going to go through a few things of what to include, but then we're also going to go through a few things of what not to include as well. So the first thing should definitely be a bit about you. So introduce yourself. You might want to talk about what course you're on. You might want to talk about any sort of extracurricular things. So maybe you're a member of a society. Maybe you've spent a couple of years as a course rep. Whatever it is that's relevant. Now, obviously, make sure it's relevant. So if you've worked in McDonald's for the last 2 years, fantastic, but it's probably not really relevant to your officer role. But like I say, if you've been a course rep for the last 2 years and you're running to be a school officer or one of the president roles, that's quite relevant. So I would include things like that. I think it's nice to have a little bit about why you're running as well. So obviously, like I said before, there'll be personal reasons you're running. You want to gain new skills and become more employable and all that sort of stuff. Is there a vision that you've got? Is there something you want to change? Are you really passionate about a certain aspect of the student experience, and that's why you're deciding to run? You should also probably say a little bit about why you think you'd be good at the job. So do you have certain experiences. Like I said, maybe you've been a course rep or some other sort of voluntary role that's really equipped you to go on to be an officer. Have you got certain personal qualities you think, are you really good at talking to people? Are you good at negotiating things? Have you got quite good leadership or project management skills? So all these first three things are about you really, and what impression of yourself you want to give voters to make them think that you specifically would be good in that role. Now, I don't think this should be the whole manifesto, and I don't think it should take up a huge part of the manifesto. It's up to you. But I think if people only have that, then you're missing a really key ingredient from your manifesto. And that's what would you do if you're elected? So you could be a fantastic individual. You could have loads of great skills. You could have loads of cracking experience. Someone might read all of that and think you're a top person, but they still wouldn't know what you would actually do if you're elected. So, what sort of issues do you see on campus that you want to fix? Is there something new that we don't do currently? And I say we, that could be the Students' Union, could need to do something new, or it could be the university. Or is there something we already do, but actually we don't do it very well, and maybe we do it in a way that excludes certain people, or that could be done in a way that engages students better? Again, either as all the university in general. So think of all those things. What are the issues? What are the things you need to be changed? What new things do you want to introduce? But then you just stop at that. Say, what would you do about it? So you could very easily identify that there is a problem with student mental health. I think probably almost any manifesto I've ever read has talked about mental health in some way or another. It's not really enough to just say, okay, there's a problem with mental health, and I would like to fix that if I was an officer. What specifically would you do about that? Would you have specific policies or ideas or initiatives that you would want to bring in to try and tackle that issue? And there's a question, not necessarily for the manifesto, but for you to think about as you're creating the manifesto is, would that solution you've just proposed work? So it's all well and good saying, I want to bring in this policy to fix this issue, but how do you know that's going to actually fix the problem? So to do this, you might want to spend a bit of time trying to talk to people that might know what the solutions are. That might be certain student groups that are particularly affected by the issue you're trying to address. It might be worth trying to speak to them and get a sense of what they think is needed to try and fix the problem. Maybe you need to contact some staff members, either in the Students' Union or the university, to find out if something's already being done about this issue and what the timescale on that is, if that's still going to happen, if that's likely to solve the issue. So be careful with this. We don't want candidates before voting week to be doing anything that's seen as campaigning. So what I don't want people to do is go around saying, I'm running for this role, therefore I want your views on this issue. And that would sort of, if you did that to lots of students, that would be that campaign activity, which isn't allowed. But what you can do is try and find out, what students think about certain issues, or again, if there's staff members that are dealing with an issue or that work in that area, you can contact them and find out what's currently being done about those things. There's a few things to avoid in writing a manifesto as well. So first thing, obvious, please don't lie. And in general, if you're not sure if something's true, probably put it in there. Don't put it in if you don't. So a classic example of this might be a student writes a manifesto and they say, the university has done X and I think this is really bad, so therefore I'm gonna do Y. If you're not really sure whether the university's done something or not, or you're not really sure about the context of a problem, don't write it in there if you're not really sure about it. Always double check your facts if you're making claims in your manifesto or any campaign material. We'll check that you know what you're talking about, but before you commit something to the manifesto. And if we spot things in a manifesto that's or any campaign material that is very obviously not true, then that will be a sort of a breach in the election rules, and we would have to deal with that. It's important, I think, be bold, be imaginative, and have a big vision, absolutely. but don't overpromise to students, because one, it's not fair and honest, and two, if you do get elected off those promises and can't fulfil them, then you're going to find yourself in hot water as an officer afterwards. You'll make life more difficult for future you. Don't pledge. I'm going to secure another £1 million from the university to fund student services. You can't promise something like that. So absolutely think big and think of big and bold ideas, but make sure there's a reasonable chance of success. And in this regard, there are students' union staff are happy to talk around. We're happy to advise on the feasibility of an idea. So if you think, I've got this idea for this, is it actually going to be possible? We're quite happy to advise on the feasibility of certain things. What we won't do is tell you whether we think something's a good idea or not. We won't express a view on it in that way, but we can give you an idea from what we know about the university and the students' union and budgets and things like that. We can give you an idea of whether something's going to be feasible, or whether you're going to really struggle to be able to do that as an officer. On this as well, I suppose it's linked to not over-promising, is be clear and specific. So like I said earlier, I think there's another point here, don't be too vague, because all this is tied in together. There's a balancing act, I suppose. So let's say you want to tackle mental health as a big issue on campus for students. Don't just say I'm going to do something about mental health. That's way too vague. You need to give students and voters an idea of what it is you will actually do to fix mental health problems. But at the same, on the other side of it, be too specific. So don't say, I'm going to get exactly this amount of money from exactly this fund, and use it to fund a staff member to work exactly on these days and this number of hours. That'll be way too specific, and it sort of goes into the over-promising aspect. You can't guarantee all of those things are going to happen exactly how you want. But what you can say is, this is a problem. I'm going to look at getting a certain amount. I'm going to look at getting additional funding from the university to tackle it, or I'm going to set up this scheme that within this time period. But what we shouldn't do is be really, really specific on exactly how you're going to do things. There's sort of a balancing act. You want to give students an idea of what you would do about an issue, but you don't want to be so specific that you've tied yourself into a set of objectives that when you get into the role, you might realise for lots of good reasons you can't actually fulfil. So be clear, be specific, but don't be too specific. Try not to be overly critical of others. I think one, it's just a sort of a comms thing, in that if you're tearing into other people or the university or whatever, it's not going to look great for you if people read that, and it's not going to necessarily put across a great impression of you. But also, if you're making lots of claims about other people, you need to be really sure that you're right about that, and that you're not breaching the election rules by putting things across that aren't true. I think if there are things you want to say that you don't think have been done well in the past, whether that's by the SU, whether that's by the university, then you can absolutely do that. Just be careful how you word things, and the claims you make, be sure that they're correct. And also, you've only got a 500-word limit in a manifesto, so you might not want to spend all that much of that word limit sort of criticising others, unless you need to do that to make it clear why you're putting something across, or why you're proposing a certain policy. But really, that 500 words, you want to really focus on what's special about you and your ideas and your campaign. So try and avoid loads and loads of criticism of other actors. The other thing is not to just just spam every idea. I'm sure loads of you have got great ideas and you've got loads of them. Try not to just sort of spam every idea that's in your head into a manifesto with no sort of coherence and no thought for the things that are going to matter most to students. Like I said, you've only got 500 words in a manifesto, so you're probably not going to be able to put in every single idea that you've got in there. What I would say is prioritize which are the issues that are going to matter most to students. Which do you think are the things that are going to be the easiest for you to talk about when you're campaigning? What are most likely to engage students in your campaign? So yeah, you've got to. I suppose it's a bit like writing an essay, really. There's going to be a point where you look over your draft and you think that's going to have to be cut. That's not 100% necessary. There's no reason why you can't talk about some of those other ideas in your wider campaign. and you know, have those ideas out there to talk about to students as you're campaigning. But in terms of your manifesto, you want to focus on the things that you think are going to be most important to students. A few quick words on the style of writing your manifesto. So, so basically, avoid silly language. Don't. I think there's a tendency when people put things out like this to try and sound really clever and really intelligent. But if students aren't going to be able to understand what you're saying, then there's no point in putting it in there. So have clear, easy to understand language in your manifesto. Make sure it has a logical flow to it as well. So, you know, don't talk about being a course rep and then chuck a policy idea in and then talk about you know, what course you are and then another policy idea. I think, you know, you're trying to tell a story with a manifesto about yourself and your ideas. So sit and think about what order you want to put things in your manifesto and make sure it flows nicely. Read it back to yourself a few times. Rules are free. I love a good rule of three. It's a rhetorical device. I think if you could summarize your campaign aim, you know, if you could summarize what you want to do as an officer in three sort of broad ideas that you could sort of rattle off really quickly whenever you speak to a student, it's going to be really useful. You know, I want to do, if I was you know, I'm on this course, I've got this experience, and I want to do X, Y, and Z. That's great. Now, one thing I would suggest is that when you're writing your manifesto, you might have loads of different policy ideas, but if you sit down and look at these different ideas, you might be able to group those into 3 groups or 4 groups or 2 groups or whatever. But you might be able to group these a little bit. So in terms of writing your manifesto, you could have, you know, 2, 3, 4 big headings that you put out in bold in the manifesto. And then underneath each of those headings, you might go into a bit more detail in a few different bullet points. So one idea might be you want to do something like mental health. I'll stick with that example. So your general theme is tackling mental health problems. Then underneath that, you'd have lots of different, you'd have a few different policy ideas and bullet points underneath that. I think that could be useful because the other problem is that often students and voters won't always sit and read every manifesto all the way through. It would be fantastic if everyone sat and read every manifesto from end to end. That would be great, but it doesn't happen. So what you do need to think about is what are you getting across to students in the few seconds they might spend actually glancing over your manifesto. If you think about the formatting of the manifesto, unfortunately on our nominations form, it's reasonably limited, the formatting you can do, but you can sort of put things in bold or you can lay things out in a certain way. Think about what a student's going to see if they're just having a quick skim read of this. If you can group, if all they see is huge chunks of text, I think that's the next point. If they just see a huge chunk of text, they're probably not going to read that, most people. Whereas if they can see a few sort of subheadings and then some bullet points below that, even if they just read the subheadings, you know, they might get an idea of what you're about, and that might be enough to get the vote in some cases. And then if they're really interested by that, or they want to know a bit more about one of them, they can then read the bullet points below and get a bit more detail. Of course, you don't have to do that. You can lay out your manifesto in whatever way you like, but that's a bit of advice from me. I think, you know, whether it's doing the bullet point and heading system or something else like that, that sort of allows students to very quickly get a sense of what it is that you're about. That should probably also mean that you think very carefully about what's in the first couple of lines of your manifesto as well. So maybe you've got a tagline, maybe some of these key ideas that I've talked about are maybe things you want to get in the first couple of lines, and then you talk about them in more detail later on in the manifesto. But think about what a student's going to get a sense of if they only read the first couple of lines, or if they only quickly skim your manifesto. What are the things that are going to stand out to them? What impression are they going to be left with? And then for the few that are really interested, you can go into lots more detail in the rest of the manifesto. There's a question then. So you've got this great manifesto. You've got a key set of promises in your manifesto that you're gonna work on if you become the officer. You have laid all that out really nicely. You've not been too vague or too specific. You've struck a nice balance there, and you've done a bit of research. You've maybe spoken to key places, or you've researched what's happened on other universities about a certain issue. You feel like you've got a good sense that the things you've promised are gonna be a good way forward. you've got your manifesto up on the website. What do you do with it then? I think some candidates sometimes just completely forget about that manifesto and then run a campaign as if they've not got one, which I think is a real mistake. So as I said, I think a manifesto is a really good starting point for a campaign because it gives you a chance to really think about what your message is in that campaign. So I think everything you do in your campaign should then come from the manifesto, whether it's the things about yourself that you want to highlight or whether it's your key ideas that you want to achieve as an officer. Everything else in your campaign should be centered around the message that's in that manifesto. So the first thing I think is to talk to students about what's in your manifesto. Now, I'm not suggesting you then copy and paste your manifesto to every student you talk to, but what you should do is take 2 or 3 key points from that manifesto and use that in a conversation with a student. So you approach a voter and suggest. When I say approach, I mean online this year. You say, I'm running for this position. Would you consider voting for me? Chances are they're probably going to turn around and say to you, well, what are you going to do if what are you going to do if you're elected? Why should I vote for you? So if you can say to them 2 or 3 things that are key points, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And if you're interested, you can read more about it in my manifesto. You can say that to every student you speak to, then that's going to leave a really good impression with them if you're able to put that out there really quickly and you're confident in those ideas. Think about when you're creating content for your social media campaigns, or if you're designing posters or anything else like that. Think about those manifesto points. So maybe you want to take one of your key points each day and put out some graphics or memes or whatever it is. You could put that content out there that focuses on one of your manifesto points and explains it a bit more each day of the week, for example. But whenever you're creating stuff, whenever you're creating content, think about what those ideas are you're trying to get across in your manifesto. And we're really encouraging people to do videos this year. We've got a separate session on how to make a great video later on. And on top of videos, there is also going to be the candidate question time during voting week. So when you're preparing video content or when you're preparing for the questions time, always think about what's in my manifesto. What have I promised to voters? In every interaction, in every video, in every bit of content, can I get across this key message that I'm trying to put across and that I've developed in a manifesto? Yes, sorry, I was wrong at the start. The deadline for manifestos is the 5th of March. My apologies. Every candidate has to get a manifesto into us by the 5th of March, 11:59 p.m. Otherwise, you will not be able to stand as a candidate. So please make sure you get something through. It have to be 500 words. If you just want to have a short couple of paragraphs and you're happy with that, that's fine. But there has to be something in there that gets across what you're running for and who you are. So please make sure to get those in by then. As I said, I will check manifestos to make sure they don't break any electoral rules, but I won't be sort of going in and spell checking manifestos. I'm not going to be telling you whether I think something's a great idea or not, so I won't be doing things like that. But I will answer questions on general manifesto advice, and I will check manifestos to make sure they don't breach any rules. Yeah, the rest of that's just key info that you can find in the handbook as well around deadlines.